The cold of the marble floor seeped through the thin soles of Imani's worn sneakers, a constant reminder of where she was. A ghost. A shadow paid to erase smudges from glass and dust from surfaces that cost more than she would make in a decade. In the pre-dawn stillness of the supply closet, the only light came from the cracked screen of her cheap phone. She pressed play for the 10th time, her thumb trembling. Her own shaky breathing was the first sound, then the gentle chirping of last night's crickets on the back patio. Then, the voice of the lady of the house, Mina. Smooth as honey, sharp as broken glass. The replacement will be at the gate at 7 sharp. He knows the route. He knows what to do at the tunnel. A man's voice, lower and rougher, replied. And you're certain he won't hesitate? He's being paid enough to forget hesitation exists, Mina had answered. A pause, then the soft clink of a glass. By the time anyone realizes Jihan isn't at his meeting, the car will be a memory at the bottom of the Han River. And so will he. Imani's heart hammered against her ribs, a frantic bird trapped in a cage. She had been taking out the last of the dinner party trash, her movements silent and practiced, designed to make her invisible. She had frozen behind a large potted ficus, the plastic bag crinkling in her fist, as Mina met the man in the shadows of the sprawling patio. She had meant to eavesdrop, but once the words were spoken, they were branded into her mind. In a moment of pure, unthinking panic, she had fumbled for her phone, her finger finding the record button she so rarely used. It was a stupid, desperate impulse. The recording was muffled, full of static, but the words were there. Unmistakable. She glanced at the time on her phone.
6:48 a.m.
12 minutes. Her shift was over. She should be walking out the service gate, heading for the bus stop, putting this opulent, dangerous world behind her for another day. She should forget what she heard. People like her did not get involved in the affairs of people like them. Getting involved was how you ended up a headline, or worse, not even that. Just a missing person no one had the resources to look for. But the image of the car, a sleek black sedan, sinking into murky water wouldn't leave her. And the man, Kwon Ji-han, she barely ever saw him. He was a phantom in his own home, a presence felt more than seen. He moved through the mansion like a storm cloud, all silent pressure and the threat of lightning. The staff spoke of him in whispers, their eyes darting to the corners of rooms as if he might materialize from the shadows. They said he was the most powerful man in Seoul's underworld, that his empire was built on loyalty and cemented with blood. She had only seen him up close once, a week ago. She had been polishing the floor-to-ceiling windows in the grand foyer when he descended the floating staircase. He wasn't loud or ostentatious. He was the opposite. He was absolute stillness. He wore a charcoal suit that looked like it had been spun from shadow and steel, tailored so precisely it seemed a part of him. A sliver of a white cuff, the glint of a platinum watch, and eyes that saw everything and revealed nothing. He hadn't even glanced at her, a piece of furniture in his landscape. But she had felt the weight of his presence, the sheer density of his power, and it had made the air in her lungs feel thin. To think of that man, so controlled and absolute, dying in a trap set by his own wife, it felt wrong. A perversion of the natural order of this place. He was the predator. He wasn't supposed to be the prey.
6:52 a.m.
She couldn't do it. She couldn't just walk away. It wasn't in her. Her grandmother had always told her, right is right, even if it costs you. Imani had a feeling this was going to cost her everything. Pushing the closet door open, she slipped into the main corridor. The house was beginning to stir. Other staff moved with quiet efficiency, their faces blank masks of professionalism. Imani's own uniform, a simple gray dress, felt like a costume for a part she no longer knew how to play. Her heart was a drum against her ribs. She walked, not ran, towards the front of the mansion, forcing her feet to move at a measured pace. Panic was a luxury she couldn't afford. Panic would get her stopped. She reached the top of the grand staircase just as he appeared from the corridor leading to the master wing. It was him,
Kwon Ji-han.
Today he wore a navy blue suit, so dark it was almost black. It fit his broad shoulders perfectly, tapering to a narrow waist. His black hair was immaculately styled, and as he walked, he adjusted the cuff of his left sleeve, a simple, economical movement that revealed the face of an impossibly expensive watch. He moved like the room owed him space, the air parting before him. His face was a mask of cold indifference, his jawline sharp, his expression unreadable. He was heading for the front door. Down below, in the gleaming marble foyer, his head of security, a grim-faced man named Park, stood waiting. Beyond the towering oak doors, she could see the glint of the morning sun on the hood of a black sedan. A new driver stood by the open rear door, a man she had never seen before.
6:57 a.m.
Time was gone. Imani didn't think. She acted. She descended the stairs, her soft-soled shoes making no sound. She was supposed to use the service stairs, to remain unseen. This was a violation of the highest order. She felt the eyes of the other staff on her, wide with shock and fear. She ignored them. Jihan was halfway across the foyer. His hand was reaching for the briefcase Park was holding out to him. "Stop." Imani's voice came out, louder and clearer than she expected. It cracked the reverent silence of the morning ritual. Everyone froze. A maid holding a vase of flowers stopped mid-step. Park's hand, holding the briefcase, froze in the air. Quan Jihan did not turn. For a long second, he remained perfectly still, his back to her. She could see the rigid line of his shoulders, the tension that coiled in his neck. He was a predator who had just heard a twig snap behind him. Slowly, deliberately, he turned. His eyes found her on the stairs. They were dark, so dark they seemed to pull the light from the room. There was no anger in them.
No surprise.
Just a flat, chilling assessment. He was looking at a problem that had just appeared, a variable he had not accounted for. "Don't move," she said, her voice shaking now that his full attention was on her. She took another step down, then another, until she was standing on the marble floor a dozen feet away from him. His guards tensed, their hands shifting inside their jackets. "Follow me." The silence that followed was absolute. It was heavy, weighted with the unspoken threat of violence. Park took a half step forward, his expression thunderous. "Girl, you have lost your mind. Get back to your duties before I—" "Park." Jihan's voice was low, quiet, but it cut through the air like a razor. Park fell silent instantly, his jaw tight. Jihan's gaze never left Imani's face. He was searching for something, a flicker of deceit, a hint of madness. She met his stare, her own terror a cold knot in her stomach, but she did not look away. She couldn't. This was it, the precipice. He took in her simple gray uniform, the cheap phone clutched in her white-knuckled hand, the terrified honesty in her wide brown eyes. He was a man who trafficked in lies. He heard them every day from his enemies, his allies, his own family. He knew their texture, their taste. This felt different. This felt raw. He gave a nearly imperceptible nod of his head, not to her, but to his men. Then he looked back at Imani. "Where?" he asked. The single word was a command. "Your office," she managed to say, her throat dry. Without another word, he turned and began walking towards the west wing, where his private study was located. He didn't look back to see if she was following. He knew she would. He had commanded it. Imani's legs felt like lead as she followed in his wake. The eyes of the entire household staff were on her, their expressions a mixture of horror and morbid curiosity. They were watching a dead woman walk. As she passed Park, he gave her a look of pure venom. She had disrupted the order. In this house, that was a sin punishable by swift, silent removal. She walked behind Jihan, her eyes fixed on the back of his perfectly tailored suit. He led her down a long hall lined with modern art, the paintings stark and brutalist. They arrived at a set of double doors made of dark wood. He pressed his thumb to a biometric scanner, and the lock clicked open with a soft, expensive sound. He pushed the doors open and stepped inside, holding one for her. The gesture was so unexpected, so jarringly polite, that she hesitated for a second before slipping past him. The office was less a room and more a declaration of power. One entire wall was a sheet of armored glass, offering a panoramic view of the sprawling city of Seoul below. The Han River was a silver ribbon in the distance. The furniture was minimalist and severe, a massive desk of polished obsidian, 2 black leather chairs, and nothing else. The room was cold, clean, and utterly devoid of personal touches. It was the den of a predator. Jihan walked to his desk but didn't sit. He stood behind it, his hands resting lightly on the cool, black surface. He was framed by the city skyline, a king surveying his domain. "You have interrupted my morning. You have broken every rule of this household. You have 60 seconds to explain why you should be allowed to continue breathing," he said. His tone was not cruel. It was factual, like a doctor delivering a terminal diagnosis. Imani's hands were slick with sweat. She fumbled with her phone, her fingers clumsy. She finally managed to navigate to the audio file. Her heart pounded in her ears. What if he didn't believe her? What if he thought this was some kind of trick? She held the phone out, her hand shaking so badly she was afraid she would drop it. "Last night," she said, her voice a whisper, "on the patio. Your wife." She didn't need to finish. She pressed play. The tinny, distorted sounds filled the sterile silence of the office. Her own breathing, the crickets, and then Mina's voice, clear and venomous. "The replacement will be at the gate at 7 sharp. By the time anyone realizes Jihan isn't at his meeting, the car will be a memory at the bottom of the Han River." As the recording played, Imani watched Kwon Jihan's face. It was like watching a glacier. Nothing moved. His expression did not change. His posture remained relaxed. But she saw it. A flicker, deep in his dark eyes. A tightening of the muscle in his jaw, a subtle, barely there clench. It was the only sign that the words were landing, sinking into him like shards of ice. The recording ended. The only sound was the hum of the room's climate control. Imani stood there, her arms still outstretched, the phone feeling like a lead weight. She had done it. She had delivered the message. Now, her fate was entirely in his hands. He was silent for a long time. He looked from her phone to her face, his gaze analytical, searching. He was recalibrating his world around this new, impossible piece of information. The betrayal was one thing. The source of the warning was another. A cleaner. A girl who should be invisible, who should have no loyalty to him whatsoever. "What is your name?" he asked, his voice still unnervingly calm. "Imani," she breathed. "Imani," he repeated. He said her name differently than anyone else had. Not soft, but with a strange precision, as if he were cataloging it, filing it away. He looked past her, towards the window. He checked his watch.
7:05 a.m.
He reached for the phone on his desk, a sleek black device that looked more like a weapon than a communication tool. He pressed a single button. "Park," he said into the phone. "Who is driving my car?" A voice crackled on the other end. "The replacement, sir."
Hans Nebel.
"Han is ill today." Jihan's eyes, cold and hard as obsidian, met Imani's across the room. "Tell him to proceed. But he drives alone. Tell him to take the usual route to the Gangnam Tower.
Do not tell him why.
Just give the order." He listened for a moment.
Yes.
Alone. He ended the call and placed the phone back on the desk with a soft click. Then he walked to the window, his hands clasped behind his back. He stood there, a formidable silhouette against the morning light, and waited. Imani didn't dare move. She didn't dare breathe. She was trapped in the quietest, most terrifying room she had ever been in, waiting for a verdict she couldn't begin to comprehend. He hadn't thanked her. He hadn't threatened her. He had simply tested her claim. They stood in silence for 3 minutes that stretched into an eternity. Imani watched his back, the sheer, immovable stillness of him. He was watching the ribbon of road that led away from the estate. Then, in the far distance, a plume of black smoke billowed into the clear morning sky. It was followed, a second later, by a deep, guttural boom that vibrated through the armored glass of the window, a tremor she felt in the bones of her feet. The car was gone. Kwon Ji-han did not flinch. He did not react at all. He just continued to stare at the pillar of smoke for a long, silent moment. The proof. Indisputable and final. That was the moment everything changed. Slowly, he turned away from the window. The cold mask of indifference was gone. In its place was something far more frightening. A stillness that was not calm, but coiled. The quiet of a predator whose territory had been invaded. His eyes found her, and for the first time, she felt he was truly seeing her, not as a cleaner, not as a problem, but as the one, single, inexplicable piece on the board that had not moved as expected. "You will not be leaving," he said.
It was not a request.
It was a statement of fact. He walked over to an intercom on his desk. "Park. Lock down the estate. No one enters or leaves without my direct authorization. Find my wife. Find the man she was with. And bring the girl, Imani, to my private wing. She stays with me." He had saved her life by believing her. She had saved his by warning him. And in doing so, she had chained herself to him. The invisible girl was now the most visible person in the house, a house that had just become a gilded cage. The days that followed were a blur of surreal tension. The mansion, once a place of quiet, orderly routine, became a fortress humming with barely suppressed violence. Men in dark suits, their faces grim and their movements economical, swept through the property. They were Jihan soldiers, his personal army, and their loyalty to him was absolute and terrifying. Imani was escorted to his private wing, a section of the house she had never been permitted to clean. It was as minimalist and severe as his office, all clean lines, dark woods, and shades of gray and black. There were no photographs, no clutter, no signs of a life lived. It was a space designed for control, not comfort. She was given a guest room that was larger than her entire apartment, with a bed that felt like sinking into a cloud and a bathroom carved from slate. It felt like a prison cell furnished by a billionaire. She was a ghost of a different kind now. Not invisible because of her station, but because she was hidden. She saw no one but Jihan and, occasionally, his head of security, Park, who now looked at her with a grudging, resentful respect. Jihan was a constant, unnerving presence. He worked from a living area in the wing, a phone perpetually at his ear, his voice a low, lethal murmur of Korean. He was dismantling his wife's world, piece by piece. Bank accounts were frozen, her family's business interests suddenly besieged by regulatory issues, her friends and associates brought in for quiet, terrifying conversations. He was a master of this dark game, moving his pieces with surgical precision. He mostly ignored Imani, but she felt his awareness of her at all times. She would be reading a book on a sofa, and she would feel his eyes on her. She would look up, and he would be staring, his expression unreadable, before his gaze flicked back to his work. One evening, he was standing by the large window, looking out at the city lights. He had been still for almost an hour. Imani was curled in an armchair, trying to pretend she was somewhere else, anywhere else. "It was an arranged marriage," he said suddenly, his voice quiet in the darkened room. He didn't turn around. "A merger of two families, two empires. I did not expect love. I am not a fool. But I expected loyalty. It is the currency of my world. The only currency that matters." He finally turned, and in the dim light, she saw the cracks in his armor. It wasn't sadness. It was something colder. The sting of a profound miscalculation. She had everything. This house. A name that commanded respect. A life of absolute luxury. I gave her an empire to be queen of. And she tried to have me killed in my own car, like a common street thug. He walked over to a small, discreet bar and poured 2 fingers of whiskey into a heavy crystal glass. He swirled the amber liquid, the ice clinking softly. "This is not the first time a woman's betrayal has cost me," he murmured, almost to himself. "But it will be the last." There it was. The wound he carried. She didn't know the details of the first time, but she understood now that his wife's treachery was not just an attack on his life, but an echo of a past failure. a failure to protect someone, or to see the knife before it was plunged into his back. His obsession with control, his coldness, his fortress of a life, it was all a defense against this specific vulnerability. He looked at her then, his eyes sharp.
You.
Why did you warn me? You owe me nothing. Your life would have been simpler if you had walked out that door. Imani met his gaze. I don't know, she said, and it was the honest truth. It wasn't right. He stared at her for a long moment, a flicker of something unreadable in his eyes. He seemed to find her answer both insufficient and deeply compelling. He didn't believe in right. He believed in leverage, debt, and power. Her simple, inexplicable morality was a foreign language to him, and it made her different from every other person in his orbit. The next day, the danger escalated. A message was delivered. Park brought a small, lacquered box to Jihan. Inside, nestled on a bed of black silk, was a single, dead canary. And beneath it, a photograph of Imani, a grainy shot of her leaving her apartment building a week ago. The temperature in the room dropped 10 degrees. They know, Jihan said, his voice a low growl. Mina's accomplice. He knows it was an inside leak. He thinks you are my agent. Imani's blood ran cold. The threat wasn't just in this house anymore. It had reached outside, touched her world, her real life. My family, she whispered, thinking of her mother and younger brother back in the States. They are safe, Jihan said immediately, with absolute certainty. My people have already secured them. They will not be touched. The casual way he said it, the global reach of his power, was staggering. He had protected her family before she even knew they were in danger. The gesture was not kind. It was practical. She was his asset now, and he protected his assets. But it still sent a strange, complicated feeling through her. Gratitude, tangled with fear. That night, the attack came. It was not subtle. A team of armed men breached the estate's perimeter. Alarms blared, shattering the night's silence. Jihan moved instantly. He grabbed Imani's arm, his grip like steel, and pulled her from the room. Stay with me, he commanded, his voice calm amidst the chaos. They were in a hallway when two of the intruders appeared at the far end, raising weapons. Jihan reacted before Imani could even process the threat. He shoved her hard against the wall, shielding her with his own body as the air exploded with the sound of gunfire. Plaster and wood splintered around them. She was pressed against the wall, her face against the cool silk of his shirt, her world reduced to the scent of his cologne, cedar and something clean like rain, and the solid, immovable wall of his body. His own men returned fire from the other end of the hall. The firefight was short, brutal, and ruthlessly efficient. When it was over, Jihan didn't move for a long second. His body was still pressed against hers, his breathing steady. He was checking the area, listening. Then he pulled back. His hands were on her shoulders, his eyes scanning her face, then her body, searching for injury. Are you hurt? He asked, his voice rough. She shook her head, unable to speak. Adrenaline sang in her veins. He had used his body as a shield for her. The intimacy of the act, born from pure violence, was more potent than any touch she had ever known. He saw the small cut on her cheek where a piece of shrapnel from the wall had grazed her. He cursed under his breath, a sharp, guttural sound. His thumb came up and gently, so gently, wiped away the single drop of blood. His touch was feather-light, almost involuntary. Their eyes locked. The chaos faded away. The sounds of his men securing the house became a distant buzz. In that moment, there was only the charged space between them, the scent of gunpowder, and the shocking, tender pressure of his thumb against her skin. He dropped his hand as if burned, his mask of control slamming back into place. They came for you, he said, his voice flat and cold again. This is my fault. It was the closest he would ever come to an apology. In the aftermath, they found one of the attackers alive. Jihan interrogated him personally in the mansion's basement. Imani was not allowed to be there, but she heard the man's screams, and they would haunt her dreams for a long time. From the interrogation, they learned the name of Mina's lover, Choi, A rival Lieutenant Jihan had long suspected of disloyalty, and they learned where they were likely hiding. An old, forgotten property that had once belonged to Mina's family. This was when Imani crossed a line. Jihan's men had the location, but they didn't know the layout. Imani, however, had spent a boring afternoon weeks ago looking through old architectural plans of the estate's associated properties she'd found in the library. It was a habit of hers, learning the shape of places. "I know the building," she said to Jihan as he planned the assault with Park. "There's a service entrance in the back, behind the old kitchens. It leads to a network of tunnels under the main house. You can get inside without being seen." Jihan and Park both turned to look at her. She was no longer just a witness. She was providing tactical intelligence. She was actively participating in his war. She saw the calculation in Jihan's eyes. He was reassessing her value once again. "Show me," he commanded, unrolling a blueprint. She pointed out the route, her finger tracing a path on the dusty paper. She was helping this lethal man hunt down his wife. The old Imani, the girl who just wanted to earn her paycheck and go home, would have been horrified. But the old Imani was gone, burned away in the fire of an exploding car and a hail of bullets. "You should be afraid of me," Jihan said to her late that night, as they stood in the quiet of his office before the planned raid. "I know," she replied, her voice steady. She looked at him, at the man who moved through violence like it was his native language, who had killed and would kill again. "But I'm not." He stepped closer, invading her space. He was so close she could feel the heat coming off his body. "You are the only person in this house who has not lied to me, Imani," he said, his voice a low, dangerous confession. "You are a complication I never anticipated, and a truth I can no longer afford to dismiss." He said her name again, that same way, like a claim, like a brand. He was the most dangerous man she had ever met, and in that moment, she understood that the greatest danger was not the threats outside, but the pull he had on her. She had told herself staying was survival. She was lying to herself. The raid was set for dawn. Jihan and a small elite team were going. He had forbidden her from coming, ordering her to stay in the panic room with 2 guards. But as she replayed the scratchy recording on her phone one last time, searching for anything else, she heard it. A faint, rhythmic sound in the background of Mina's voice. A clanging, metallic echo. It was the sound of the bell from the old chapel, a mile away from the property they were targeting. The wind must have been blowing from the west that night. The property they were going to was to the east of the chapel. Mina had been somewhere to the west. She ran. Bursting out of the panic room, she shoved past the shocked guards. She found Jihan as he was about to get into an armored SUV. "You're wrong," she said, breathless, holding out her phone. "The location. You're wrong. Listen." She played the tiny snippet of sound. Jihan listened, his head tilted. He knew every inch of his territory, every sound. His eyes narrowed. "The old textile mill," he breathed. It was another of Mina's family's defunct properties, west of the chapel. Abandoned for years. He looked at her, his face grim. Her intelligence, her attention to a detail everyone else missed, had just saved his men from walking into a trap. He made a decision. "Get in the car," he said. The final confrontation was at the mill. It was a decaying brick behemoth, full of shadows and the ghosts of industry. Jihan's team moved with silent, deadly grace. He had left Imani in the vehicle with Park, but she saw it all on a monitor connected to their body cams. They found Mina and Choi in the main processing room. It was an ambush, but now, Jihan was the one with the element of surprise. Choi fought back, but he was outmatched. It was over quickly. Mina stood there, beautiful and defiant, as Jihan approached her. She tried to reason with him, then to threaten him. When that failed, she saw Imani on the monitor in Park's hands. "Her!" Mina shrieked, her voice echoing in the vast, empty room. "The little cleaner. You'd trust her over me? Your wife." In that moment, Imani acted. She had already sent the full, unedited recording to Park's phone. "Play it," she said into the comm link. Loud. Park patched it through the team's comms, and Jihan activated his external speaker. Mina's own voice filled the mill, cold and clear, plotting her husband's murder. The betrayal was laid bare, undeniable, echoing off the high ceilings. The sound stripped the last of Mina's composure away. She lunged for a weapon on a fallen guard, a desperate, final act. It gave Jihan the opening he needed. The resolution was swift, silent, and absolute. A cost was paid. Jihan's marriage was over, incinerated by betrayal. The illusion of his life was shattered, leaving only the cold, hard reality of his empire. Days later, the mansion was quiet again, but it was a different kind of quiet. A heavier silence. The staff had been vetted and replaced. The blood had been washed away. Imani stood in his office, looking out at the city lights. He stood near the window, his back to her. "It's done," he said. "Choi's organization has been absorbed. My wife is gone.
You are no longer in danger," he paused.
Your family is secure. A trust has been established for them that will ensure they want for nothing. You are free to go. A flight is booked for you, back home. It leaves in 2 hours. He was giving her a choice. An exit. A return to the life she had lost. She could picture it. Her small apartment. The bus ride to a normal job. A life where her biggest worry was paying rent on time. A life without the scent of cedar and steel, without the weight of a dark-eyed gaze, without the terrifying thrill of being the one person a king trusted. She walked across the silent room until she was standing just behind him, her reflection appearing next to his in the vast expanse of glass. They were two figures against a backdrop of a million glittering, dangerous lights. The cleaner and the king. "My old life is gone," she said, her voice quiet but firm. "You said it yourself.
There's no going back to it."
He didn't turn. He just watched her reflection in the window. "Staying here, it is not a safe life, Imani." "It's the only one I have left," she replied. It was not a declaration of love or a plea.
It was a choice.
A statement of fact. He finally turned to face her. His dark eyes searched hers, holding all the unspoken weight of what had passed between them. He reached out, not to touch her, but to gently push a stray curl from her face. His fingers barely brushed her skin, but a current passed between them, electric and undeniable. "Then stay," he said, his voice a low command that sounded more like a plea. She didn't answer. She didn't need to. She had already made her choice. She would not be his cleaner, not his prisoner. She would be his truth, the one complication he could not afford to lose, in the heart of his cold, glittering empire.